This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, and you're listening to Python's Paradise, your film and music show. And this is your host, Greg Gilbert, a.k.a. the Python Hyena. And folks, I remember last year for episode 28 in April of 2016, I had the lovely Day Young on here, and we talked about Rock and Roll High School and her Scientific American. And even despite wearing those big glasses, she was still a very, very lovely woman. Well, we have the director of Rock and Roll High School as my guest today. And before he did Rock and Roll High School, he was used to rip tickets at concerts, and he would let mice into the concerts as long as they had their own headphones. But he switched from that to, doing movies because, mice don't attend concerts like they used to anymore. Folks, I give you the talented director of Rock and Roll High School and several other films, Allan Arkush. How you do, Allan?
I'm good. How are you? Hello, everyone out there. Yeah, it's really nice to be on the show, and thank you for being fans of the movie still, and fans of my other work. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I know that you was on screen in Rock and Roll High School ripping ticket for mice. Now, did that pay well?
Right, yeah. And I was wearing the shirt that I'm wearing in the scene in Rock and Roll High School is the shirt that was the, so to speak, uniform of the theater that I worked with when, I guess it was from 1968 to 1971 when I was in film school in New York at NYU. I worked at a rock and roll theater called the Fillmore East. And I started out as an usher and then on the stage crew and then in what was in those days called the Psychedelic Light Show.
Okay.
And that's how I worked every weekend and sometimes during the week. And if you are a fan of classic rock, every single band that you can imagine played there. So I saw everyone from, let me think, who's the first people I ever saw at the Fillmore East was Janis Joplin with Big Brother and the Holding Company.
Oh, wow.
So I saw them. I saw the Doors, Jimi Hendrix Experience, and Jimi Hendrix Band, the Gypsies, Grateful Dead, The Who, the Led Zeppelin, the Faces, Humble Pie. I mean, I could go on and on. So that was my background, and that's the reference in Rock and Roll High School. And so I've always been involved in music, and I've seen a lot of live music. And as the years went by, my taste changed, and I discovered, along with everyone else, punk rock, and that's how I got into the Ramones.
The Ramones are actually the most played band on my show.
Wow.
I love the Ramones. Yeah.
They have a great catalog of songs, and I think, I bought the first Ramones record. I was living in Los Angeles. I moved out to Los Angeles in 1973, and I was working for a guy named Roger Corman.
Okay.
And I started out in the trailer department, making trailers and TV spots along with Joe Dante.
Yep.
And a friend of mine from film school named John Davison, who was sort of in charge of, who was Roger's assistant and in charge of the trailers and TV spots. And we were in charge of everything involved with post-production. Now, mind you, we had never done any of this before. Whatever we learned in film school about how to operate a moviola and edit was all the knowledge we had. And whatever knowledge we had from watching trailers was what we had. And so we were kind of making it up as we went along. And we were pretty good at it, And I worked for Roger from 1973 to 79. So I was out in Los Angeles and still, interested in music. And, of course, hearing bands like the Eagles were popular then, and Jackson Browne and the Bonnie Raitt and Linda Ronstadt and that sort of music. But I was also, kept my ears open and used to read the Village Voice,
okay,
which is a newspaper, weekly newspaper out of New York, published, in and around Greenwich Village. And I've been reading that since I was a senior in high school. And there was a critic there named Robert Christgau, one of the great rock critics of all time. And he used to write about bands, and in the voice, the name of the Ramones kept appearing, and people would review them. I guess starting in about 75, I'm going to guess, 75, 76 or so. And then I guess I read Robert Christgau's review of their first album, and it sounded good to me, and I had never seen them live, so I bought the album, and that's my introduction to them. But I have to say, I did not love the first album at first, and I played it a lot. Well, let's say I played it like 3 or 4 or 5 times, and I didn't get it. I heard it, but I wasn't like, what is this? Everything sounds alike. And I had some friends over in my apartment. We're all film buffs, and we used to watch movies at night on 16 millimeter. And somebody said, "What are you listening? What records are you listening to?" I said, "You guys aren't going to believe this. You got to hear this band, the Ramones. The critics are crazy about them in New York. Let me play something for you." So I put the record on, and in the days when you had phonographs and vinyl and a needle, and I played like about 20 seconds each song on one side. I said, "Look, they sound alike." And as I did it, I realized it was supposed to be that way. It was funny. And from then on, I liked that record. It was like by demonstrating it to other people and sort of dissecting it like that and hearing it, I realized that was its strength. And so I got to really like that record, and I bought the second record, but it was the third one. It was Rocket to Russia.
Okay.
Once I had Rocket to Russia, I thought Rocket to Russia, and I still do, is one of the top 10 greatest rock and roll records of all time.
Oh.
That's the one. Sheena's a punk rocker, everything on that.
I love Sheena as a punk rocker. Road to Ruin had a lot of great stuff on it too. Like
it does.
I
want to be sedated, and I really love Joey's version of Needles and Pins.
I really like the song "I Wanted Everything."
Okay. That's another good one. Yeah.
I love that, and Bad Brain, and other ones. That was a really good album as well. By
the time that record came out, I guess I was ready to go into production on Rock and Roll High School. It was right around that time, because that was the record that we had at one point had I Want to Be Sedated ended up in the movie. So that record had just come out. So at that point, I had met the band, and we were talking about the movie at that point. So that must have been about the fall of 1975. No, later, I'm sorry, 78.
Okay. So what was it like to meet the Ramones? Because they're such an odd band, but they don't have that kind of violent streak like is associated with the Sex Pistols,
Right. Well, what happened was, so I had liked the band a lot, and we had gone to Warner Brothers and talked to them, we're just looking for bands. And once their name came up in connection with the movie, I thought that was a really interesting idea because of the humor of their music and the pure rock nature of it. I was kind of concerned early on, and that became more of an issue as we started editing the movie, that the music in the movie not be too self-serious is one way to look at it. Let me see how I can put it. Okay, if you know the movie, when the kids are rioting, right, and they're running around the school, we tried many different pieces of music underneath those scenes. One of them we tried, which is a great album, was the first Clash record, or the second Clash album.
Okay.
The song White Riot.
Yeah.
But when you played that, it changed. There was a tonal change, and it didn't work. It was too aggressive and serious for the type of tone I was trying to do.
So you went with Schools Out with Alice Cooper?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Alice Cooper in High School by the MC5, that stuff was more in line. And Come On by, another band that was on Sire. I can't remember their name right now. But so anyway, going back with that was our end point. So when the Ramones, we went and spoke to their managers, Danny Field, the legendary Danny Field, and Linda Stein. And we told them the story of the movie, and they really loved it. And we made a presented them to Roger Corman. I had not had any conversations with the band yet, strictly with their managers, and it was a deal was made for them to be in the movie, and Roger approved it, but I hadn't met them yet. So I guess it was in the August or September of '78. I flew to New York, and they were playing a gig at Harrah's, which was like a disco in the Upper West Side. And they just played a lot around town in clubs and things because they weren't certainly selling any records, and touring was still problematic because in the Ramones' history, at that point, they were very unsuccessful playing on shows with other bands because the Ramones were so singular. Like, if they went out on a Black Sabbath tour, and you'd think that would be a good thing, but they were so despised by the Sabbath band who, that it was, they get paid, but it was not good, right? So anyway, I go to see them at Harrah's. And at the show, I guess I ran into Danny Field, and he took me backstage, and I met the band. And while I was in the dressing room, in comes Lester Bangs, the legendary rock critic. You know who Lester Bangs is?
I'm actually not familiar with him.
Oh, well, you should be. Listen up, all you listeners. If you want to know where rock and roll writing came from and rock and roll criticism, Lester Bangs is one of the people who started it.
Okay.
He's a character in Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous.
Oh, I love that movie. Is that the Philip Seymour Hoffman character?
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Why did I get that? Yeah, that's a great movie, and that was a great performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman.
So if you want to read writing that is like a rock and roll song that's, that comes at you off the page like a 45, Lester Bangs, Carburetor Dung is one of his books are available and his stuff online. So Lester Bangs is there. And then into the room came Tina Weymouth and her husband from the Talking Heads. He was there. It was like I'm in heaven, And I met the band a little bit, and then they went out on stage. They were about to go. They were tuning up, and Joey would drink this health drink before he went on stage, and that's where I got and the manager made sure that Joey drank it because it was good for his throat. And that's where I got the idea for the health food in Rock and Roll High School. And they went out on stage and played a fantastic set. I mean, they were slamming, and I loved them. And we talked after the show, and we made plans the next day to all meet at his manager's apartment. And we had dinner together, this big Italian dinner, which they brought in, which was like takeout in a way. And Dee Dee said, "Where's the pizza? I thought we were having Italian food." And that's where that came from. And I went and saw the next night's show, and then after the show, I went downtown with Joey and the band and Arturo, who was their lighting guy, and he designed all their logos, and Arturo Vega, very important guy in Ramones history, and I think he had been at every single show ever. He worked for them. And I went down to CBGB's with them. We hung out at CBGB's. And then we went over to their loft where Arturo and Joey lived, which was right around the corner.
Okay.
This is this is in the East Village. So this is the Bowery and about 3rd Street, 2nd Street. So that's where the conversation started, and we would talk about music and things like that. And then when they came out to California, they, we started, we wrote the movie to fit them a little bit and came up with these ideas for scenes, because the scenes with the band were very vague till we got a band, Okay. And so they came out to California. I guess we shot the movie in November of '78, and they came out a little early, and we spent time together, and they came over my apartment where I lived, and I had a 16-millimeter projector, and we were going to watch A Hard Day's Night, because it's like the rock movie, and we're talking about lip syncing and all that, because they weren't aware that Hard Day's Night had lip syncing in it.
Okay.
And So here's a little anecdote. Am I allowed to use 4-letter words on the air?
If you want to, yeah. When this is podcast,
Okay.
it'll be fine.
And you'll just beep them out?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay. It's up to you.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they come into the apartment. Now, Joey was a very quiet, withdrawn kind of guy. And John was sort of the spokesperson for the group, and Mark is new to the band then, and Dee Dee. And so they come to the apartment, and they're looking around, and there's my record collection. So they're going through my record collection, to see what records I like. And Johnny sees that I've got about 20 Grateful Dead records, or every Grateful Dead record that was available up to that point. And he looks at them, and he goes, "What the fuck is this?" And I said, "It's the Grateful Dead." He goes, "Do you like them or what?" John always used to say, "Or what?" I said, "Yeah, I like the Dead." And now we didn't have a real relationship yet, And he says, "So wait a minute. How can you like the Grateful Dead and us? Tell me that." Right? It was still, they weren't completely sold on the movie idea, but they were doing it. So I had to explain my theory about why the Ramones and the Grateful Dead are auteurs. Now, do you know what the auteur theory is?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, the auteur theory is that the director of a movie is the author of the movie. That is, the director's style and obsession and the view of life and view of the world is a determining factor in a movie, which is sometimes true.
Okay.
And I said that the Ramones and the Dead were auteurs, in that, like a great director, no matter what they're doing, it always comes out like them. Every John Ford movie is like a reflection of John Ford. So even if the Ramones do a cover song, it still sounds like a Ramones song. And that's true of the Grateful Dead. And that's why I said, I love you guys, because you are who you are, and there's a purity to it. And that kind of mollified him a little bit. John was so strongly anti-hippie. So we watched A Hard Day's Night and, developed a friendship and worked together on the set. And, they were bored a lot because, as fast as we moved, it's still slow making a movie, even though we shot the movie in 20 days. And, they weren't great at reading their lines or anything, but, that's part of the charm of the movies. They're not trying to be anything that they're not,
What was it like directing them in that movie?
It was more a matter of trying to get them to be natural and them to just be themselves. I mean, there were a couple instances where things would pop up, like outside the theater when they sing, "I just want to have something to do tonight." They're walking down the sidewalk,
Yep.
Which is obviously not real in any way, and also trying to make Mark feel good about the fact that he really couldn't even fake playing the drums as he walked. He had to have 2 drumsticks,
Yeah.
and letting John know that he looked really heroic when he's playing that guitar break, at the end, even though it's not plugged in or anything. Once we got to the concert stuff, they were okay. It was, that was easier for them. But the dialogue scenes were hard. They weren't used to memorizing dialogue. They had never done lines. It's not just a matter of memorization. It's like fitting in and playing off of people, and that wasn't part of any skill set they had. So it's just a matter of capturing it and hoping it was funny and true to what it was. And, it's kind of a big cartoon. But they were, they were hardworking, and it was John's idea to put the "Kick Me" sign on the back of the principal.
Yeah.
That's his thing. And, that line, "Do your parents know you're Ramones?" That's a funny line.
Yes, it is.
So, they were good sports. And we stayed friends after that over the years.
And unfortunately, I don't think any of them are with us anymore, huh?
Mark is.
Oh, Mark is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I went and saw that movie, End of the Century, the story of the Ramones, and
Wow, isn't that something? That movie, it's really good, but it's really sad, and you realize how hard they worked. They had a real work ethic, and a lot of that came from John.
Yeah.
Those are the two. Obviously, the sum of the parts together is pretty great. But there was always that sort of polarity between John and Joey.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that tension is one of the things that makes their music so powerful. I mean, it's like their music is like surf music if it was backed by a chainsaw.
Yeah.
You know. I mean, the influence of Beach Boys and the influence of the girl groups and the things like that, and Joey's writing and Joey's lyricism, and then John, who invented that great downstroke, style of playing, and that engine that the rhythm section has. It all kind of works together. And, at the time, it's hard to believe how dangerous it was perceived as being and how dangerous they were perceived as being. And there was a big concern, and I'm talking just strictly about their record company, that they not appear to be too punk.
Okay.
Because the Sex Pistols and the punk movement had flopped so badly commercially and their hope was that New Wave, which was a poppier version of that, would be the next big thing. So, they were trying to position the Ramones. This is strictly the record company. The Ramones did the Ramones music. That's it,
Mm-hmm.
As being New Wave, and now when you listen back, I mean, little kids love the Ramones.
Yeah.
Everybody loves it. Sounds so accessible. I mean, you watch a sports event. You can go to a hockey game where you guys are, and it's the fourth quarter, and the crowd is cheering along the hey ho, let's go.
Yeah.
This is unheard of in those days. They were so outside the mainstream as to be practically invisible. And they were never played on the radio. Only a few radio shows, specialty punkish kind of shows or what's new kind of shows that played them. Never heard on the AM radio, which is hard to believe because their songs now sound very commercial.
Yeah.
But they were really outliers.
Yeah, and they did that great concert scene in the movie, and
Yeah.
I gotta say though, I am a huge fan of PJ Souls. Loved her in Halloween, Carrie.
Yeah.
I've always loved her. I'd love to get her on the show eventually. She's hard to flag down, but of course she played Riff Randall, rock and roller, and she just brings a sunny flair to the movie. And I heard that she even the clothes she was wearing was stuff that she had brought, and also doesn't hurt that she is really attractive.
Yeah, the deal was that, I mean, PJ was actually a name in the sense that, she had been in movies before. And when you were in a Roger Corman movie in those days, they didn't, unless it was like a big name, for a specific reason associated with a genre, then Roger would go for that. But mostly it was casting of little-known actors, and PJ came in, I guess, at a casting call. But we had seen, I don't remember if Carrie came first. Yes, she had been in Carrie. And we really loved her as Riff Randall. And she knew that the movie was Riff's movie.
Yeah.
And her manager said, well, they're previewing her latest movie, and it's on Hollywood Boulevard tonight. Why don't you guys come and see it? And that was Halloween. So I saw the sneak preview of Halloween.
Love Halloween.
Yeah, it was just great. So two things happened on Halloween. Obviously, we cast PJ, and the guy who was supposed to shoot Rock and Roll High School, his name is Jamie Anderson, and I went to film school with Jamie. And he had shot a lot of stuff for Corman that I'd been on, but the union blocked him from working on a non-union movie as a director of photography.
Okay.
And so I had to find another cameraman on very short notice. So we approached the guy who shot Halloween, Dean Cundy.
Okay.
So he came and shot Rock and Roll High School, and his career is, he's gone on to shoot Back to the Future. His credits are gigantic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that happened. And for a while, we actually considered Jamie Lee Curtis for the part that went to Day Young.
Okay.
But I think we didn't. I think that she, at that point, now Roger Corman would only pay scale.
Okay.
And you know what that is? That's like minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that Jamie would have done it for minimum. And PJ wouldn't do it for minimum. I mean, her agent wanted minimum plus, I don't know, like $200 more or something, you know. And it was a kind of a big thing, and Roger kept saying no. But so the deal ended up that she would use her own clothes, and that would cover the difference. So that made sense to Roger. That's one of the reasons that happened, as a way of acting like we were saving money.
Yeah, I love PJ Souls in the movie.
Well, she's based on Riff Randall is based on a combination of real people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons the movie still plays for people today and is so popular among young women, because she is not a groupie. You know, she's a true rock and roll fan and wants to find her place in what's a predominantly male world, and that is to write the songs.
Yeah.
And so she was based on a little bit. Remember I told you about the Fillmore where I worked? Mm-hmm. There was, when I was like an usher, I be standing in the lobby because that's where you watch the show from and let people have to go by get seats. There was a bunch of people who were there as often as they could be there, you know, and they would buy the cheapest ticket and they'd befriend an usher, and they, you know, if there was an empty seat or whatever, we would let them sit in an empty seat. You know, it's not like today where it's all, you know, corporate.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about in those days, tickets were $250, $350, and $450. And now then it went up $1. So for that money, you might see a triple bill of the opening act being Miles Davis with the Bitches Brew band, Steve Miller Band, and Neil Young and Crazy Horse. I mean, it was that kind of quality. Or Sly and the Family Stone and Jimi Hendrix together. So there was kids who used to hang out in the lobby, and there was these three young women who were true rock and roll fans. And I used to see them all the time, and I would try to find them seats, and we'd always talk about music. And they loved the British bands and didn't much like the hippie bands. And they liked 10 Years After, Savoy Brown, The Who, Rod Stewart and the Faces, Jeff Beck, that kind of music. Mm-hmm. And they were such pure fans. In a way, I kind of based Riff Randall on them. And they even cut school to get online to get tickets for the Rolling Stones at Madison Square Garden, and got their picture in the paper as being the first online. It was in the Daily News. So that's where that came from.
Yeah.
And there was also a young rock writer named Lisa Robinson who used to come to shows all the time, and I'd talk about music a bit with her. And because she would come down to where the door to the stages, which was a really good view of the stage, and we'd let her hang for a while, you know, until the fire marshal would get upset. And she was another person who was like had Riff Randall in her. So when the movie was being written, I was thinking about who Riff Randall was. She's a combination of these real pure rock women.
And as I've mentioned, I had Day Young on here last year, and
right.
Loved Day Young, talking about her Scientific American. I have an interesting story to tell you about her. She did, I play the Rock and Roll High School soundtrack on my show, and she did not know there was a soundtrack. And
really?
I had somebody say, you know, how can you not know there's a soundtrack? But what people don't remember, today everything's got a soundtrack. Back then, certain movies like Saturday Night Fever, Grease, or whatnot would have a soundtrack. Yeah. So it wasn't quite as common as it is today.
No, and it was also the first movie that Roger Corman ever released that was supposed to tie in with the record company and the soundtrack. And there was a lot of friction between the distribution end of Corman and the record company's distribution end. They were not on the same page. And the movie actually came out before the soundtrack, and it kind of hurt the movie. It was supposed to be a coordinated effort. And I guess also the record company people didn't really realize that Corman would release his movies not nationally. He would release them in different areas.
Okay.
And so they assumed there would be an opening in New York. Every movie has to open in New York. But Corman movies didn't. We opened in Texas.
Okay.
You know, and because there was bookings available at drive-ins in Texas. One of the reasons the movie was a failure at the beginning is because it didn't get to the audience it was meant for right away. It took a couple of months.
Yeah.
So you want to move on to another topic?
Well, I still got some more rock and roll
Sure.
high school. I was going to say with Day Young, I ordered a rock and an autographed picture from her. But when I did, I had ordered the soundtrack of Rock and Roll High School, and I sent it to her, and
Oh, that's nice.
she was delighted with that. Yeah,
Yeah, and I wish that the MC5 song was on there, but it does have Brian Eno on there and Todd Rundgren, and I think the Alice Cooper's on there, and I think that the concert stuff sounds great.
yeah, and I was going to say Mary Warrenov, great casting as Miss Togar.
Yeah, well, Mary I met because of Paul Bartel, who was a director who passed away,
Yeah.
but he directed Death Race 2000, and Mary was in that. And that was another Roger Corman movie, and that's where we met Mary. And then I realized that she was the woman in Chelsea Girls, the Andy Warhol stuff.
Yeah.
So she was part of the Warhol crowd and had danced with the Velvet Underground and all that stuff. So we became friends, and Mary was also in the first movie that the one I co-directed with Joe Dante, Hollywood Boulevard.
Yeah.
So that's where we spent a lot of time with Mary. And so when it came to the school principal, there was just no doubt in our minds that it would be, Mary playing the school principal. She very liked to say that a lot of her acting is being done by her hairdo. And the hair person is a woman by the name of Gigi Williams, who was part of the Warhol crowd and an old friend of Mary's. And Gigi did a great job on Mary's hair and makeup. But Mary looks nothing like that.
And Mary, of course, had that great line, "Do your parents know that you're Ramones?"
Yeah, I know. I think that's from Richard and Russ, the writers.
And, of course, Paul Bartel got ear mail in the film.
Yeah, and the original script for the movie was Joe McBride had written that, and Joe is one of the big authorities on John Ford. He's a great film historian and teaches film. Has written some great film history books. I highly recommend the John Ford book. But it was also Joe who came up with the idea of the protests and stuff, because he had that experience at his school and had read about it, and that's where the students going out on strike and all that came from, was Joe. And he thinks, we've discussed this a lot. I thought I always had in my mind blowing up the school, but Joe says it was in his draft, so I'm sure he remembers that. So, the different writers brought different things. The overall plot line and everything was from Joe McBride, and then the humor and the Eagle Bauer and a lot of the silliness and stuff was brought in by Russ Devonch and Richard Whitley. And they were two writers that came to New World with their student films, and that's how I met them. And we worked together on this terrible movie called Death Sport.
Okay.
And they played zombies in Death Sport. So if you ever see Death Sport, you see guys crawling around the rocks as zombies that get stabbed to death by David Carradine. Those guys are the writers of Rock and Roll High School.
Rusty's the one that keeps getting stuffed in lockers and stuff, right?
Correct. Yeah. He's the freshman. That's our homage to Harold Lloyd.
Yeah. And, of course, Clint Howard playing Eagle Bauer, who's got that nice little setup in the washroom.
Yeah. Well, Clint I knew from working on Eat My Dust with him, and and Grand Theft Auto. I knew him through Ron Howard, who had directed, two movies. Who directed a movie for Roger Corman. Grand Theft Auto had been the star of Eat My Dust. Ron's a great guy.
Yeah. And, of course, Vincent Van Patten had a lot of great, funny lines. I like the fact that he stayed kind of naive through the whole movie.
Yeah.
And he was very funny in the movie as well. And I got to mention also Don Steele as Screamin' Steve Stevens. Loved him.
Right. Yes, and he had been in a couple of Corman movies. He had been in Grand Theft Auto, and also we used him a lot to be the voiceover on trailers, the narrator. And he was a very, very popular DJ in Los Angeles. He had a daily radio show, which was just like he was, very hyper.
Yeah, you can hear him all through Gremlins as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And the last person I will ask from Rock and Roll High School is Lynn Farrell, who played Angel Dust.
Oh, Lynn, yeah. When I first started working for Roger, and I first started to direct, that was on Hollywood Boulevard. Roger really liked it and liked what we did, and he made a suggestion to me that I might want to try going to acting school because it had worked very well for him. Roger was a great mentor, and so he set me up to go have a meeting with his acting teacher, a wonderful method acting teacher named Jeff Corey. And Jeff is an actor in many movies. Jeffcory. If you look him up, he was in Little Big Man, Brute Force. You would recognize him. And I was in his class, and Lynn Farrell was one of the people in his class. And Lynn and I did a bunch of scenes together in class, and that's how I got to know her. And I put her in Rock and Roll High School. She might even have a little part in Grand Theft Auto, too.
Yeah.
She. And so that's how I knew her. She continues to act, and then she became a private detective.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I haven't spoken to her in 25 years at least. But anyway, I thought she did a great job.
Yeah, I loved her and PJ bantering back and forth, and she had just like PJ, she had a great wardrobe.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like last year, I had the two authors of Destroy All Movies on here, and we talked about Rock and Roll High School. And we also talked about Get Crazy, which I hadn't seen at the time, but I have since seen it. And I got to say, great follow-up to Rock and Roll High School. How did that come about? Get Crazy, now going back again to my experiences at the Fillmore. Get Crazy, after I did this movie called Heartbeeps for Universal with Andy Kaufman and Bernadette Peters. And it was pretty much of a failure. And I realized that it was not a good expression of who I was. And so I really wanted to do something about that was important to me, and I wanted to do something about my years working at the Fillmore. And an independent production company was looking for movies to make, and I went in and I pitched this idea, and they liked it, but they wanted it to be less nostalgic and serious than I did, and it ended up being, and since Airplane was a big hit at the time, they wanted a movie that was like Airplane in a rock and roll theater. Okay.
So that's how the tone of that movie came into being. It's a funny movie. It doesn't have characters that, this is my own point of view, I appreciate that people really like it, and it has lots of good jokes and very intense rock music. I wish that the story was stronger and it was less cartoony, but that was the movie that they wanted me to make. And the people who were the financiers of the movie decided that they wanted to do it as a tax shelter. And so in the course of that movie, they made a movie that they'd hoped would lose money so they could make money, just like the producers. So that's how that movie came into being. And they also fought me on a lot of casting decisions and things like that. But nonetheless, there's so much great stuff, and it was a chance to work with one of my all-time idols, Lou Reed. And, that was terrific. And the writers who wrote some really, really funny scenes. And Laurie Eastside and the Nada Band. And there's just, in a way, it's my version of rock criticism, It's like every band plays the same blues song, which is Hoochie Coochie Man, which is my way of saying, it all comes from the blues. And, I was doing jokes on a lot of things that I loved about rock music. So in that way, it's successful. I just wish that an audience has got to see it more. And I don't think it'll ever come out on DVD because of the cost of the music and the fact that the movie got shuffled around from one distributor to another. And somewhere along the way, the soundtrack masters got lost. So they can't really make a quality DVD out of it. But I'm very fond of the movie, and it's a favorite of Edgar Wright, which is really nice, and Quentin Tarantino loves it, and so it's the movie has its fans, and it's always nice that it's there. Yeah.
Strangely enough, it's on YouTube, and if it's on YouTube, you'd think they'd be able to put it on Blu-ray.
Well, the version that's on YouTube is taken from a VHS.
Okay.
So, and somewhere or other there is a video master, but it's not in stereo. It's mono.
Okay.
And that's the master that you see around. And there are 35 millimeter prints of it around, because when it runs in LA, that's where, and it does about once every 5 years or so. The last time it ran, I went to see it. It was at the New Beverly. That's the theater Clinton owned. And it was a wonderful screening. I really enjoyed watching it with the audience. It was really heartwarming and nice that it happened. And, a lot of people, like my friend Hunt Lowry produced it. He did a great job. He had made that whole movie for like $6 or $7 million, all shot in one location. It was an intense movie to make, but, there's so much of it that I like, and there's so much of it that's a reflection of my feelings about rock music.
Well, I hope it eventually will get on disc. I am
Sure.
a Blu-ray person.
Thank you for mentioning it. It's everything I've done, there are two things that I wish were out on video. One is Get Crazy, and the other is a movie I did for Showtime that is one of my favorite things I've ever done. It's called Elvis Meets Nixon.
Okay.
And that was on Showtime in like 1997, 98. And it's the story of how that famous photo of Elvis and Nixon got to be made. And it was a wonderful script by Alan Rosen. It's one of the few times that I've actually said yes to a project even before I finished the script. I mean, the script was so great, so funny. I called my agent while I was reading it and said, "This is the greatest script. I want to do this." I really pitched myself for the job. And it's a very, very funny movie, which in a way satirizes Nixon and brings you insights into who Elvis was and how he was really an overgrown adolescent. And I really, really liked making the movie, and I really loved the way it came out. It was out for a while on VHS, and then for various reasons that corporations have, they never really did a big wide release of it. But again, you can see parts of it on YouTube. But for me, it's one of my favorite things I've ever done.
Yeah, and you mentioned Laurie Eastwick, who is East Side, who was so good in Get Crazy. But I gotta say, the real scene stealer was Malcolm McDowell as Reggie Wanker.
Oh, well, Malcolm, I mean, that's that was our wonderful producer on it. Hunt Lowry somehow had known and met Malcolm and snuck Malcolm a script. And at first he rejected it, and then he got into it, and we met with him, and we said, his character is a combination of Mick Jagger and Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
And he really loved the idea of it. The big moment of truth came when we went into the recording studio to record his vocals, and we realized that he really couldn't sing. And no matter what we did, it just couldn't sing. So he did it more like dramatic pronunciations, hot stuff and all that stuff, and then it worked. And he just brought so much to it. And one of the nice things is spending time with Malcolm and hearing him talk about working with Stanley Kubrick. And one of my idols is the man who sort of discovered Malcolm. His name is Lindsay Anderson.
Okay.
And he directed a movie. Again, everyone out there listening, get your pencils out. The movie is called If. I-F. If,
okay. ...
It is the movie that Rock and Roll High School is based on.
Okay.
It's about a private school in England, a boys' school, and the students revolt at the end and machine gun all their parents at the graduation ceremony. It's one of the big influences on Rock and Roll High School. It's a classic of English cinema, and it won the Cannes Film Festival. And that was my first exposure because that was Malcolm's first movie. And from there, he did one of the great music movies of all time. It's called Oh, Lucky Man.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack to that is by Alan Price, who was a keyboard player for the great British blues rock band, The Animals. That's Alan Price playing the organ on House of the Rising Sun.
Yeah.
Famous. Yeah. So I knew Malcolm's work from that, and so we got along great. And, of course, since Get Crazy, Malcolm and I worked on Heroes together, the series I did for NBC. I was executive producer and director of that, and we worked again on Franklin and Bash, another show. And, he's just a terrific guy.
Yeah, I love Clockwork Orange, and of course.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and of course, one of your earlier films, Hollywood Boulevard. This is a film I haven't seen, and I want to see it. But I was reading. Yeah,
it's pretty easy to see. I think it was on Netflix for a while, and there's a new Blu-ray of it, which is truly ironic because it's like a perfect digital version of a movie that's made for $75,000. Do you want to talk a little bit about Hollywood Boulevard, or do you want to talk about something else?
I do want to talk about it. In fact, I was reading up on it. I definitely want to see it. You did this with Joe Dante, of course, and
correct. That was our first movie, and we begged Roger Corman to let us make it because that was our goal, was to direct a movie, and to set the background a little bit. For instance, the first thing I worked on when I worked for Roger was a trailer for a movie called Caged Heat.
Okay, I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, women in prison movie, and it was a brand new director, and had done it, and that was Jonathan Demme.
Okay.
So Jonathan was there. Ron Howard was there in those days. Paul Bartel, Louis Teague, John Sayles. There were so many young and up-and-coming directors there, and we wanted to be part of it. And I guess it was our second year at Corman. There was a period of time when Rogers' own film equipment wasn't being used. So we talked Rogers into letting us take that equipment and make the cheapest movie we could. And that was where the budget figure came up of $75,000. And we promised him we'd have more action than any other movie. And this is basically, my friends John and Joe. And I owe them a tremendous debt because when I started working, John and I went to NYU together, and he was the one who helped get me my job for Corman. And with Joe, he was who I worked with, Joe Dante, and Joe's knowledge of film and his generosity in sharing that knowledge, and him and John's film collection were things that have stayed with me my whole life. The movies that they owned and the knowledge I learned and how they opened me up to so many different kinds of movies. And it was a give and take. It was great. We were like really tight in those days. And so we talked Roger into it, and we were going to use the action scenes from all the movies that Roger was distributing that he owned. And we would write a new storyline to connect them all. And a friend of ours from NYU, Danny Opatashu, whose father was an actor, David Opatashu, wrote the script, and it's a murders on the movie set kind of plot. And that's how we were able to connect all these different pieces of film, like a Big Bad Mama footage. That's the 30s gangster movie. Death Race 2000. That's a science fiction car picture. All these war scenes, battle scenes from the women in prison movies from the Philippines, they're all connected through this bogus set of movies that this cheap little movie company is making. And that's how that was our excuse to make a storyline that used all that for Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, we each got paid $85 for directing it. And it's still playing, so you can still get it on, it just came out with a new Blu-ray. So
I've got to see it. I did want to ask, though, what were your memories of Candace Rylson? Excuse me.
Candace was like one of the actresses who had been in, I know she was in Summer School Teachers and maybe one or two other Cormans, and she just really popped. You know what I mean? When you saw her on screen, she had such charm, and she was so vivacious and such a nice person. She thought that Joe and I were really nuts. We were such movie geeks that she thought we were pretty funny. And she kind of looked at us like, okay, guys, whatever you want. You seem very enthusiastic about this, And she was utterly charming and easy to work with and very, very funny. And again, supplied her own wardrobe. So what more could you ask for?
Yeah, she was somebody we lost too soon, and even you worked with Claudia Jennings in Death Sport. Another one we lost too soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another film I gotta bring up, and I hope this doesn't bring any bad feelings, because I love Caddyshack, but I guess Caddyshack 2 does not quite bear the same reputation.
No, not at all. Caddyshack is a wonderful combination of the right actors, the right script, the right director, and everything. And for reasons, you should never make a movie unless you feel you are the best person in the world to make that movie. And I took the job on Caddyshack 2 because, for me personally, I was tired of just directing television episodes, and it just didn't come out as good as we hoped. No one sets out to make a movie that's not as good as they hope, And Jackie Mason's a very, very funny man, but he doesn't have that acting ability and ability to communicate as an actor. He's a great stand-up. And, it just didn't work out as well as we hoped. There are some funny things in it, and Randy Quaid's funny.
I think Randy Quaid steals the film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, what can you say?
I heard stories like...
But, just before that, I was directing the TV series Moonlighting, which was a gigantic hit series. And then, it made me also appreciate the shows that I was directing on television. So I went back to television, and had a lot of success after that with Ally McBeal, The Practice. I did some of those. I had directed Fame before that, the television series. And after I did Caddyshack, I went on and did The Temptations, the miniseries about the Motown group, The Temptations, which had a lot of Emmy nominations. I won an Emmy for that. And that's really one of the things that I'm most proud of. When you look at the stuff that I've done and people talk about, Rock and Roll High School, they all know that. And just as many know The Temptations. It was a big success. And again, another music project of mine. And right before The Temptations is when I did Elvis meets Nixon. And I got to do a movie with Frank Sinatra called Young at Heart. He's in it, that Tina Sinatra produced. So I've done a lot of things with musicians that I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah, I heard. What's that?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I heard that when you did Caddyshack 2, originally Rodney Dangerfield was supposed to come back, and there was problems where that ended up where he wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know.
But you got Chevy Chase back.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about the other projects I've done, because the majority of my work has been in television. I've directed about over 250 episodes of television. I did the Ally McBeal episode with the dancing baby, which everybody knows.
Okay.
And I did, did you ever watch Ally McBeal?
Very late. I actually got a Blu-ray player set up home, and that's what I watch. I don't watch TV.
Well, I did that. Did you ever watch a show I did called Heroes?
I've heard of it. I hadn't seen it, no.
Okay, well, Heroes was quite a successful show in the from about 2005 to about 2009. And I also produced and directed a show called Crossing Jordan, which was on NBC. I just finished working on the sequel to The Good Wife called The Good Fight, which is on CBS.
Okay.
And I've done NCIS, and I'm now here in Nashville directing the series Nashville. So over the years I was saying Elsewhere, which was a medical show, LA Law. But Moonlighting was a tremendously popular romantic comedy. Every week they would have over 35 million viewers. And I've always been a fan of romantic comedies, and that's the kind of movies that I grew up loving, and being at film school I love. So for me to get to be on a TV series with Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd and written like those romantic comedies was something that was, very, very strong for me. There are lots of homages to romantic comedies, even in Rock and Roll High School.
Yeah.
And in Get Crazy. They're full of homages. Eagle Bower Jane is a character taken from a romantic comedy written by Ernst Lubitsch. And Princess Chantamia from Get Crazy is a name taken from another romantic comedy written by Preston Sturges called The Palm Beach Story. So my work is full of references to those kinds of movies, and that's when I got to direct Ally McBeal and Moonlighting. Those were really, for me, a much more mature comedic style.
You did
beyond what I was doing before, and it's great that I had movies like Rock and Roll High School, but for me personally, it's also good that I continue to do work and that gets seen.
You also did Shake, Rattle, and Rock for television as well, and that was, of course, a takeoff on Rock and Roll High School.
Yeah, what that was in the 1950s and 60s, there was a production company called AIP, American International Pictures, and they were the ones that pretty much invented the teenage movie. They did I Was a Teenage Werewolf. They did all the Roger Corman Poe movies. They did all the monster movies. That's what they did. They realized that teenagers were different than adults and liked movies that reflected themselves, and they jumped all over that. And Roger Corman worked for the AIP and was a major producer of movies for them. The guys they had a big catalog, and so the people who, the son of the head of AIP, decided to make a deal and that he would redo the titles that AIP owned. And so they contacted a bunch of directors, myself included, and Joe Dante and Robert Rodriguez and John Kaplan. Walter Hill, I think, did one. Not Walter Hill, John Milius.
Okay.
Lots of people, and Mary Lambert. And we were given a list of titles, maybe 20, maybe more, 30. And they said, basically, pick any one you want, and you can remake it, as long as it doesn't cost more than $1.5 million, which is nothing, And so you went. I saw on the list, and it's hard to choose. There were so many wonderful exploitation titles that would be fun to make. I saw Shake, Rattle, and Rock, and that was one of the movies that I watched and paid homage to in Rock and Roll High School, in the sense that it's about parents who feel rock music is going to harm their children, and the head of the school tries to stop them, and they basically put rock and roll on trial. So that I thought, well, you know what? This is like maybe 95 or 6, so it had been almost 20 years since I did Rock and Roll High School. I thought, well, it would be great to return to this. So we did what was essentially the prequel to Rock and Roll High School. We did the late 50s, early 60s version. And when I sat down with the writer, Trish, to have it written, we kind of came to a conundrum that the music of Fats Domino and people like that were popular did not seem threatening enough to warrant the kind of storyline that we needed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It seemed too benign, especially when we watched Shake, Rattle, and Rock. Not that we were going to use Fats Domino, but we didn't have an engine for the conflict, because the music is too well accepted now, and we didn't want to make it just a campy piece. So that's when we came up with the layers of racism in it. And it wasn't the music that the people were against, it was the racial element, that it was African Americans on the dance show and the kids hanging out with groups that were black and so forth. And then the threat brought in by not just boys acting like they were motorcycle gang kids, but that they were members of the Beat Generation. that they espoused a kind of freedom and a lack of desire to be part of the mainstream. So all those elements went into Shake, Rattle, and Rock. And then someone brought in this young actress from Texas, Renee Zellweger, and she completely charmed us. And she got the part. She was fantastic in it. And a lot of friends came in and did little parts, here and there, people I'd worked with on all the TV shows that I'd directed. And I got the idea of taking the women who were in rock and roll high school and having them play moms, And of course, put Mary again as a school principal. And so in a way, it's a continuity, but it's a prequel. And Iggy Pop did some music for us. We made the movie. We shot the movie maybe 9 or 10 days, really fast. And the cameraman on it was a wonderful guy by kind of Jean Dissagonzak, who's now a terrific director. He directs a lot of Law and Order, SVUs, and lots of different shows. But he was the DP on it, and we came up with an interesting handheld style because we had to shoot really, really fast. And I played around with some camera speeds and things like that to make it look different. Yeah, I'm really happy with that movie. That came out really well.
Yeah. One last question I couldn't help but notice with Heartbeeps. You worked with Andy Kaufman. What was that like?
Very strange. The movie about Andy Kaufman says it all. He was an interesting person and he just had his own worldview, and he's truly unique. If I had to do it again, I would have made it a much wackier movie, a little more anarchic. I think in retrospect, got hung up on the love story a little too much. But Andy was wonderful, he's extremely inventive. I should have turned him loose more, But then again, a lot of Andy's comedy is conceptual,
Yeah.
His act and his timing and and the idea of trying to sing 100 bottles of beer on the wall and things like that, are all part of Andy's thing, And I don't know if as an actor that worked as much as like when he was on Taxi, he just did that extreme character with his own language. And I think that maybe that's the direction I should have taken him, in Heartbeeps. But you learn as you go along, and Chris Guest is in it, and Noni Mayron, and Bernadette Peters, who I just worked with again recently on the Good Fight, which is The Good Wife. And Bernadette was also in Prince Charming. So it's nice to work with the same people again.
Yeah, that had Christina Applegate in it as well, and she's got the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen a woman.
Oh, yeah, she's got great comedic ability.
She does. Well, and of course, Bernadette was also in The Jerk.
Yes, another very, very funny movie. She's great at it.
Yeah. Well, what?
A wonderful singer.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Exactly. She and Steve Martin also did, I think it was Pennies from Heaven, was it, together?
Yeah, really interesting movie, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, between making movies and television, which do you prefer?
Oh, television by far.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
By far, yeah. Of all the movies, I've done TV movies, but really the movies I made for theatrical, only Rock and Roll High School was the one that has any audience. And it was also the spirit in which I made it that I love, and that's another reason why I like Get Crazy. But in television, I've worked on some of the best shows ever, and worked with fantastic writers, and so I'm very, very happy with what I've done in television. And, I've worked really hard in movies. I don't want to say anything negative about stuff I've done because everyone tries to do the best movie they can.
Yes.
But really, look at my overall stuff, almost all of it is television. I've produced maybe 200-300 hours of television beyond what I've directed. So,
you have a favorite television show you worked on?
Well, I guess I really enjoyed doing Fame.
I used to watch that. I used to watch Fame,
I the original Fame, yeah. And St. Elsewhere was great. David Kelly's writing on Ally McBeal. show. There comes times where sometimes, and you don't get this with a film as much, you either get a big blockbuster or you don't, but because television stays on for a year or 2, 3 years, sometimes you're on a show that captures the zeitgeist, that captures what's on people's minds. And each week they tune in for that. And when you think about Moonlighting, that was really a show that talked about the relationship between men and women in the 80s and how the world was changing. And women, Sybil Shepherd ran the company. Bruce Willis worked for her. Ally McBeal was about second wave feminism, and it was about women in the workplace and their lives as a reflection, and how they could achieve. And Ally was an interesting character with a great imagination, and David's writing was very, very sharp. And then the two Heroes, which I don't think I've ever had a first season on the show like that, where we were just such a huge success. And the show was like a rocket. Each week we go up and up in the ratings. So that was great. And when I did The Temptations, it was very hard to make, but I was so passionate about their music. And I wanted to do something in that miniseries where I had a sustained dramatic sequence with no dialogue, that the music and the visuals told the story, almost abstractly. And that was one of the things that I worked very hard on in that. And that's the sequence, if you know the miniseries, that set to Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Okay. And it's about men and men in groups, and how when men get together in groups, they shirk all their responsibilities, and the group activity becomes their world, whether it be in a music group, on an athletic team, in the office. It's about that. It's about men as Rolling Stones, and I'm very, very proud of that sequence. And it's one of the highlights of the miniseries, and, I won an Emmy for it. And I just felt that I did right by the Temptations, and to get to work with Smokey Robinson was a great honor, and to work with the Temps, and Suzanne the Past did such a wonderful job on the producing it.
So you're in Nashville right now. What projects?
That's right. I'm working on an episode for the 5th season of Nashville.
Okay, yeah.
This is the second and third time I've been here. I did a movie here in the 90s called X's and O's.
Okay.
TV movie. And then we came back here in the late 90s to do the soundtrack to Elvis Meets Nixon. We recorded that here in Nashville.
Yeah, so that's the projects you're doing now, and anything else up in the future, or is that just what's on your plate for the time being?
That's what's on my plate right now. I've been directing for 41 years, so.
Wow. Well, you know what, Allan? It is fantastic that I was able to have you come on here and talk about your television credits, and talk about your movies, and like Rock and Roll High School and Hollywood with Boulevard and Get Crazy and all that wonderful stuff. And hopefully maybe we can get Crazy on disc. Maybe keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for, watching my work and showing such interest in it. I really appreciate it.
And, of course, you've been up in Nova Scotia. I asked, are you familiar with the Trailer Park Boys?
No. Oh, that.
Ivan Reitman produced their first of 3 movies, but they did like 11 or 12 seasons of a television show. And you mentioned Texas, where Rock and Roll High School premiered and stuff like that. I thought that because that's usually for Canadian performers, they'd be the ones I'd say would be closest to us here in the Maritimes in New Brunswick.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, Allan, before you go, I was just wondering if you would mind doing a plug for my show.
Doing what?
Sure. Just, what's that?
I'm sorry? So repeat that?
I was wondering if you do plug for my show.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
What would you like me to say?
Just say your name. And my name is Greg Gilbert. My show is called Python's Paradise, Python like the snake, and it's in New Brunswick, Canada.
Okay. Ready?
Sure.
This is Allan Arkush, and I never miss Greg Guilford's Python Paradise, especially when I'm in New Brunswick. So everyone tune in. Thank you.
Yes. Well, Allan,
You want me to do something different?
Sure. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Allan Arkush for Python's Paradise with my pal Greg Guilford. Tune in every week. Don't miss it.
Absolutely.
And here's another one.
Sure.
Straight from Rock and Roll High School to Python's Paradise. This is Allan Arkush.
Oh, that was fantastic. I love Rock and Roll High School. Thank you so much for that movie. That is one of my favorites, you know.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm so glad that, what are you, about 25 years old or younger?
I am going to be 45 in July.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. It's nice that it jumps across generations.
I would have been 7 when Rock and Roll High School came out. I would have been, I think, 4 when Hollywood Boulevard came out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I got to go.
God bless you, and good luck in your stuff in the future.
Thank you very much.
And if you
Talk to you later.
And if you got anything else to promote, don't hesitate to come back on.
Okay. Thank you.
God bless you, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.